This is the Read to Lead podcast, episode 532.
I think most people confuse prioritization and personal productivity or time management. They are distinctly different things. There's a relationship among them, but they're really different.
Hi there, I'm Jeff. Welcome to an all-new episode of the Read to Lead podcast. I'm so glad you're here. The Read to Lead podcast, of course, is the podcast dedicated to personal and professional growth, and where we interview an author each week about their latest book to learn the key insights and main ideas from that book and their thoughts on things like leadership, entrepreneurship, and much, much more. My guest today is author Harry Max. He's written a book called Managing Priorities: How to Create Better Plans and Make Smarter Decisions. I'll ask Harry to share about his DGAP model for prioritization: decide, engage, gather, arrange, and prioritize. We'll learn about the differences between episodic and periodic prioritization, what it means to prioritize our avoidances, and plenty more. Harry and his publisher Rosenfeld Media have agreed to offer exclusively to Read to Lead listeners a 20% discount code to purchase Harry's book. You'll go to rosenfeldmedia.com. That's rosenfeldmedia.com. Click on Harry's book, Managing Priorities, and then at checkout, enter this discount code, READ20. That's READ 20 for 20% off Harry's book, Managing Priorities. If you don't want to worry about remembering all that, just go to the show notes page for this episode, and there'll be a special link there to take advantage of that discount code. Again, it's READ20. The show notes page for this episode, readtoleadpodcast.com/532 for episode 532. Now, that discount code does expire soon, so you have to act fast. It is live at the time this episode is being published, however. So click on over to readtoleadpodcast.com/532 or go to rosenfeldmedia.com, click on Managing Priorities, and then enter READ20 at checkout. Harry Max is an executive player coach, consultant, and hands-on product design leader. He specializes in coaching product, design, and technology leaders to help them achieve their goals. He's worked with Apple, Adobe, DreamWorks, Google, HP, Informatica, Microsoft, Normative, PayPal, Rackspace, Skype, Symantec, and more. Harry's also an NLP master practitioner and Hoffman Institute graduate. His new book is called Managing Priorities: How to Create Better Plans and Make Smarter Decisions. Well, Harry, welcome to Read to Lead. I'm excited to have you here, and I'm looking forward to seeing you again in a few days when you come visit our private community. But thank you for being here, and thank you for writing this book, Managing Priorities.
I'm really glad to be here. Thank you so much. I mean, I think the folks that are here are exactly the kind of people I wrote the book for in some ways. You know, we don't have a lot of spare time.
Yes. Well, I wanted to start off with something that you and I were just talking about, and that is, how to go about reading a book like this. When it comes to reading, I am cognizant of the fact that it's something that most people wish they had more time to do.
Yeah.
If they're going to dive into your book, a book about managing priorities, how can they prioritize the process of reading your book?
When we were talking about it a few minutes ago, I realized that, for everybody who picks up a copy of this book, what I really want to tell them is if they don't believe that prioritization is something they should focus on, read the first few pages, right? That's part one of the book. You already know prioritization is important. You can skip that and go straight to part two, which is on DGAP, right? Decide, engage, gather, arrange, prioritize, DGAP. We'll talk about that more. That's really the centerpiece of the book. And it's actually only about 40 pages long. So the thing is you can get most of the book in under 50 pages. If that stuff resonates with you, you'll know exactly where to look, because the rest of the book is organized either for teams, for individuals, or for organizational related prioritization. So depending on what it is that's important to you, you can figure out where to go from there. You do not need to pick up the book and start on page one and read to the end.
Well, we know a little bit about your background, but what prompted you, Harry, to write a book about this topic? And why do you think it's one that so many of us seem to struggle with?
Yeah. It was super interesting. I was back at Rackspace. I was an executive there in the product organization. I was responsible for the user experience design team. And I also had a product line of all of the external facing interfaces for the company. It was like a lot of people and a lot of complexity. And one of the things that I had developed there was a framework for diagnostic thinking, problem framing, and really figuring out how to provide appropriate interventions for certain classes of problems. And the folks at the company said, wow, this is really interesting. Would you give a talk on that? And I did. And then people at the talk came back and said, hey, would you talk about this at South by Southwest? So I did. And then other folks said, hey, would you do a TEDx talk on this? So I did. And I got invited to a number of companies like USAA and Luke Holman's Innovation Games Summit at Adobe. Nobody cared. What they cared about was at the point that I would touch on prioritization, all the hands went up. And look, I'm kind of a product guy at heart. I'm looking for demand signal. Where is there an underserved need or an unmet need? And I thought it was incomprehensible. I mean, prioritization is such an important topic. There had to be good materials about it. I did a lot of it in my work, and I went and did an investigation. And it was like the scene in The Mask where Jim Carrey reaches into his pockets and pulls out a bunch of moths. There's nothing there, right? There are literally hundreds of books that talk about how important it is, and none of them, zero, that actually address the topic of prioritization as a holistic topic. And I couldn't understand how that would be true. I called a friend of mine, Lou Rosenfeld, who turned out in the end to be the publisher for this book. And he found the same thing. And we were both dumbfounded. And it turns out now I know, after looking at this topic since 2015, it's a deceptively tricky topic. It looks real simple, but in fact, it is inanely complex. We're brilliant at it as human beings in simple, static environments. See, tiger, run. Right? But in dynamic, adaptive, organizational, complex environments, we suck at it badly. And there are no good resources to help make sense of it. And, your priorities are fundamentally your inputs to your plans and your decisions. But prioritization has not been addressed as its own thing. And when I realized that, it was kind of like, if I'm going to do anything of service and be worthwhile in my life, I might as well try to codify this. And it took a long time to do.
How many years did you spend working on it?
I started the project in 2014 or 15.
Okay.
I actually hired a company and started writing the book. And 2 years in, threw it away. I had sent it out for review and to a bunch of esteemed colleagues, and they said it was terrible.
Oh, no.
So I basically canceled the project and took a step back and thought, I'm going to have to rethink this. So I turned it from a writing project into a research project. And then when I finally realized I was turning the corner from a research point of view in about 2017, 2018, I was like, okay, I think I might have a book here. And so I went back to Lou Rosenfeld in this case and said, hey, Lou, I think I'm ready to write a book on this. It's not the book I was going to write, but it is a book here that does address the topic. What do you think? And he said, yeah, let's do it.
Well, early on, you mentioned the DGAP process model, you call it, as a cornerstone of the book. Maybe you could walk us through, well, first of all, the easy part, what that stands for, but then the hard part of explaining how the model can help us become more intentional about our priorities.
Just let me take a step back for a second and suggest that almost anything that's sufficiently complex that can be described in one word is more complex than that one word, right? Think about skiing is not just lean forward, slide down a hill, right? You have to put the skis on. You have to put the, you've got to put your skiing pants and your jacket on and your gloves on and your goggles on. And you have to learn how to ski. And you have to, before that, you've got to decide whether it's cross country or it's downhill. Like skiing's not just skiing, right? The act of skiing is actually a much broader topic. And I learned that when I worked at DreamWorks Animation. Animation is not just the process of animating characters. It's actually a significantly more complex process that involves many complex process steps. And like the penny dropped for me on prioritization, prioritization is the same. It's not just the act of prioritizing. There are different steps to getting ready to prioritize, deciding if you're going to prioritize, and then putting everything together that you're going to need to prioritize and then prioritizing. So that's what DGAP is, DEGAP. D is decide if the benefits of doing it outweigh the cost of acting quickly. Pure and simple. Sometimes you don't have time to do it, right? Intentionally. E, DGAP, D-E-G-A-P. The E is engage in the process to get traction, to be intentional about the process. Who are the stakeholders who are involved? Where might you consider looking for information or gathering information, to start the process? And then G, gather that information, go out and identify the items that you're going to prioritize. And in this world, item is a reserved term. It's an unprioritized thingy. Right? So DEG, so you gather the information about the item, what the items are and the information about them. A, arrange those items in some sensible way. If you've got duplicates, get rid of the duplicates. If they're not clear, disambiguate them. Make sure that every item is self-evident and that you have enough information about those items to compare and contrast them. And then finally, you prioritize. So it's just like skiing or animation or anything where one word describes a more complex process. I'm just slowing it down a little bit and saying, look, you've got to figure out if it's appropriate. You're going to have to figure out where to get the information. You're going to have to get that information. You're going to have to process that information. And then you're going to be able to do something with that information. I didn't invent it. It sort of revealed itself over time.
You also mention episodic and periodic prioritization in the book. What's the key difference between the two, and how can understanding that difference lead to better decision making?
Yeah, this was a discovery that I made somewhat late in the process. I didn't realize that episodic is really kind of a one-off or fairly infrequent prioritization versus periodic might be something you do every day or every week or once a quarter or once a year. And then there's actual an extension of that, which is continuous prioritization. So it's kind of a spectrum from I'm going to do it once to I'm going to do it all the time, right? And it matters because in a periodic or continuous situation, you can fix things if you get them wrong often, right? You have a chance to go back. And if you're doing something like picking a college you're going to go to, where you're going to go to school, or you're going to buy something expensive like a house or a car, you're going to acquire a business, you're going to do something you're not going to be doing very often or maybe never again, you're going to want to be more intentional about it because the costs of getting it wrong tend to be a lot higher.
And another thing you emphasize in the book is the importance of identifying, prioritizing our avoidances. Why is acknowledging our avoidances so crucial for effective prioritization? And what are avoidances? How do you frame that?
Right. So one of the things I tried to do in putting together the book was understand. I've never been a big fan of the concept of best practices because I'm not sure there's anything that's really best, right? But the ones that have the most utility, that is, they get you the furthest with the least amount of effort. Right? I'm paying attention to those, right? I'm paying attention to those at the organizational level. I'm paying attention to those at the team level. And then I'm paying attention to those at the individual level. And the individuals that seem to have the highest performance tend to do three things, one of which is to identify the things they're avoiding, which I call avoidances. And they prioritize, they stack rank them. So let's say I'm avoiding 4 different things. And one of those things I'm avoiding is maybe a tough conversation with somebody who's important to me. And then I realize that's at the top of the list. And why that turns out to be so pivotal is because whatever you're avoiding is consuming a lot of energy of yours, right? You may be ruminating about it. You may be distracted by it. You may find that when you've dealt with it, it releases a bunch of energy to go do other stuff. And that seems to be the pattern. So if one of the 3 things you do as an individual on a periodic basis is understand what you're avoiding, and then consider that maybe spending 30 minutes on just that is going to be the difference that makes the difference, you're a lot closer to winning.
You mentioned earlier too about section 3 of the book, helping you to apply concepts of the book, the DGAP process, the DGAP model, to different scenarios, different settings. How can we apply the concepts of the book to improve, say, team productivity and collaboration, particularly in a work environment where priorities can shift really fast?
The pattern that showed up to be the most effective for teams that are interested in improving their performance, I document in the book. It's based on a framework called Speedboat, which is something that Luke Holman writes about in his book, Innovation Games. He wrote the foreword to my book. And Speedboat is a way of visualizing, okay, our team is a boat and it wants to go fast and it wants to avoid crashing into things, and it wants to avoid being slowed down or dragged down by things. And so Speedboat is this very simple visual framework that allows teams to identify what's slowing us down, what could speed us up, what are the things that we would need to do that we might characterize as life preservers that are going to save us if something bad happens. What do we need to avoid? And Speedboat looks at the rocks, it looks at the anchors, it looks at the propellers, and it looks at the life preservers. And if a team can identify those things and then force rank them, like which one kind of floats to the top of the list, it's a very high leverage place for a team to say, if we were really going to go ahead and tackle this, this would be the difference that would make the difference.
Mm. You shared too about the idea of a North Star goal. How do you define North Star goal in the book, and why is that essential for effective prioritization?
Yeah, the notion of the North Star goal has been written about a fair amount by a number of other folks, and I would probably butcher it beyond recognition if I were to go into trying to define it. One of the people I've been learning from is a fellow by the name of John Cutler. And he pinpointed the notion of a North Star metric, which is kind of the thing you're going to measure on your way to achieving this goal that you want. Mm-hmm. And so the notion of the North Star goal is it's the thing you always look to up in the sky as a point of reference that you always want to head toward, right? It's going to be the brightest thing. It's going to be very far away. But if you keep your eyes on it, you're not going to get distracted by all of the other bright, sparkly things. Mm-hmm. And taking it a step further, if you can assign a metric to it, you put yourself in a position of being able to measure whether you're getting closer or further away from it.
I created a course a couple of years ago called Note Making Mastery, and part of the idea behind this course and the concepts is to better handle the barrage of information coming at you every day, and making sure that the things you want to remember don't get forgotten, the things you learn that you want to use in future work, that sort of thing. And you mentioned that even seasoned professionals struggle to prioritize effectively in our fast-paced world, especially with the rise of AI and automation, something else that we talk about in Note Making Mastery quite a bit. What advice do you have, Harry, for those of us who feel overwhelmed by the constant influx of info and the demands on our time?
This is a tough topic, right? I mean, we could talk about this a long time. Mm-hmm. The shortcut to the answer, and then maybe I'll expand on it after that, is that, and this is what I try to make the case for in the first few pages of the book, is you have to prioritize prioritization itself. And once you've accepted that your priorities are your inputs to your plans and the options for your decisions, that starts to help you clear up the notion that you don't just have an experience or see something and then develop a plan or make a decision, that you want to get a lot more intentional about what's going into that plan, or what options are you considering and why in those decisions. And where this matters a ton is when other people are involved, right? And other people are always involved, right? At an individual level, even at the most simplistic individual level, we have stakeholders in our lives. And in one area of the book, I talk about how we have external stakeholders. We have, our boss, or we have our family members or whatnot. But we also have this sort of elusive concept of an internal stakeholder, right? So I have my own personal CFO inside my own brain. Like, right. Don't spend the money on that. It's not a priority, right? Or I have my inner, I really need to get I need to get some exercise, out in the wild part of me that says, I want to go for a hike this weekend, but I have this other thing I need to do, like mow the lawn. And so that we have inner stakeholders and we have external stakeholders, and then you move into an organizational context with teams, and it gets immediately complicated by the fact that everybody's got different needs, different interests, different goals. And in the best of all circumstances, you can align around some of these things and figure out how to work together. And another key takeaway from the book, and a key theme throughout the book, is that to the extent that people feel like they're part of the process, they're much more likely to go along with an outcome if it doesn't turn out the way that they hope, because they feel like they've been engaged, they feel like they've been heard. And obviously, it gets seriously complicated in an organizational context where there's a disconnect, generally a disconnect between what's going on at the uppermost echelons of the company and what's going on at the ground level, where people are actually doing kind of the work, the yeoman's work of interacting with customers, suppliers, partners, and so on and so forth. And that's where all of this comes together.
What haven't I asked you about the book? What have we not touched on that you want to make sure people know or walk away with?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there are probably a number of things, but let me start with the fact that the last two chapters of the book, so chapters 12 and 13, are about organizational prioritization. And this book is really written for kind of new or aspiring or recently promoted managers. And so those last two sections of the book are not trying to get you to go lead these things. They're trying to give you some clues about what good is likely to look like so that you can engage in a more productive way in environments, because the best companies they're already prioritizing one way or another, right? And those companies themselves are built on teams that are prioritizing, and those teams are built on individuals that are prioritizing. And so as a new or aspiring or recently promoted manager, if you do your part of prioritizing for yourself, by yourself, either episodically or periodically or continuously, and you're part of a team and you can participate in a more productive way, being aware of what good, decent prioritization looks like inside an organization is really, really helpful. Because, man, I know from having been like just a person sitting at a desk in a large organization, it's a mystery what prioritization is inside a large organization.
Sure.
But the book outlines some of the telltale features and attributes of that.
Related to all this, I mentioned note-making mastery, and I kind of view it, I guess, in some ways as an aid to help people prioritize their personal knowledge, to make sure, again, the important aspects of what they learn, the information they consume and want to keep and organize and access later easily. How would you say you go about managing your personal knowledge? How you capture notes and things you want to remember and organize them and distill them, et cetera.
Sure. Yeah, I think the short answer is poorly. I think the longer answer is I have a lot to learn from Jorge Arango, who just wrote a book called Duly Noted.
Yeah.
Who I think is a true master in this particular regard. But crazy as it is, I live by 3x5 cards. I carry them in my pocket, right? Yeah. I would be surprised if you would ever find me without a pen that works, right? Because we're inundated with information. And if you don't have a way of capturing the information, it's very hard to retain it because our memories just aren't that good, right? And I have I think some of this prioritization stuff probably fell out of having read David Allen's book. Oh my God, I can't even remember the title.
Getting Things Done?
Getting Things Done. Thank you. I just think about it as GTD as a shorthand now. And because, of course, the information capturing process he lays out in that book is kind of the rudimentary version of what I do. I'm pretty good about capturing notes and enough information about them to make sure that I don't forget them and what they were and where they happened. And I'm generally pretty good about reviewing those things and aggregating that stuff and recording the stuff I want to remember in one place, and, pooling stuff I need to process in another. I'm a terrible GTD kind of acolyte. That is to say, if I look at something and it's going to take me 2 minutes to do, I pretty much avoid it till later. And that's the opposite of what he recommends. Right. So I'm no productivity genius. And that's, I think we've touched on a really interesting point here, which is, I'm a huge fan of 4,000 Weeks by Oliver Burkeman, Time Management for Mortals, because I think I'm philosophically very much in alignment with the way that he thinks about stuff. And I think most people confuse prioritization and personal productivity or time management. They are distinctly different things. And there's a relationship among them, but they're really different in much the same way that companies tend to confuse prioritization with annual or strategic planning, right? Mm-hmm. Annual or strategic planning is a different thing than prioritization. It relies on prioritization, but it's different. And I think this distinction is key. And I spent a lot of time in the book helping tease it apart.
Yeah, you certainly do, and do a great job of it as well. You mentioned the book 4,000 Weeks. What are the books you've read that have had the most impact on you over the course of your life and career, and why have they impacted you the way they have?
Sure. One of the books I've given away the most, which is an interesting metric, is a book called Finite and Infinite Games by James Cars. Mm-hmm. And, for those of you who have read the book, you know that you only need the first chapter, right? It's the first 30 pages. The rest of it, I'm not so sure about. Yeah. But that first 30 pages explained everything I needed to know about corporate politics. Mm. And it's funny. If you were to go to, what's a bookstore, right? But if you were to go to a bookstore, if you could find a bookstore like Barnes and Noble, or go to Powell's up in Portland, or, the Strand or somewhere, Bookshop Santa Cruz near my house, and say, hey, I want to get a copy of Finite and Infinite Games. Where would I find it? They'd scratch their head, right? Because it could be in game theory. It could be in business. It could be in philosophy. And what it describes is abstract terms, but in plain English, the rules of the game in which the purpose of the game is to win. And the rules of the game in which the purpose of the game is to stay in the game. And what happens when you mix those rules. And it's fascinating. So that's one. Highly recommended. Only part one of the first chapter. There are a bunch of other ones. I mean, I love Annie Duke's book, Thinking in Bets, which is a really good book about making decisions in the face of uncertainty, but in a really practical way. And it's really, really well told kind of story of her learning about how to play poker. And if you've never read, was it Joshua Foer's book, Moonwalking with Einstein?
Oh, right.
I have a terrible memory, but he does this incredibly great job through this fantastically told story about how to remember stuff. And to your point on note-taking, yeah. I really like that. And then one of the biggest difference-making books in my life was Elliot Aronson and Carol Tavris's book, Mistakes Were Made, But Not By Me, which is really about self-deception.
That one I am not familiar with.
It is really, really good.
Excellent.
Kind of helps us understand how the world actually works with us in it and where we're implicated in what's happening.
Well, of all the authors I've interviewed over the last 11 years, you may be the one that has the deepest voice, I think. I love the sound of your voice. I had no idea what Harry sounded like until we got together today. And I'm like, oh, he's got a great voice.
I appreciate that.
And a great book. And you should pick it up. It's called Managing Priorities, How to Create Better Plans and Make Smarter Decisions. Harry, this was a treat. Thank you so much for being here and for sharing of all you've learned. And I can't wait again to see you in a few days when you join our community for that private meeting. It's going to be a lot of fun.
I'm really looking forward to it. Thank you so much.
Wow, what a great chat, and what a great list of recommended books from Harry. Duly noted from a recent guest right here on the podcast, Jorge Arango, 4,000 Weeks, Finite and Infinite Games, Thinking in Bets, Moonwalking with Einstein, and Mistakes Were Made, But Not By Me. Links to each of those books, plus, of course, Harry's book, in the show notes page for this episode, readtoleadpodcast.com/532. Don't forget, when you click that link to purchase Harry's book, to use that special discount code just for Read to Lead listeners. That discount code at checkout is READ20. That's READ 20. Next time on the show, we'll be talking with the author of a best-selling book called Ultra Learning. His name is Scott H. Young, and he's got a brand new book out called Get Better at Anything, 12 Maxims for Mastery. That's next time on the Read to Lead podcast. That does it for this time. Hope to see you next time. Until then, as always, remember, leaders read and readers lead.